Hi guys, how are we doing tonight? We're going to be continuing on with our story here of Aaron Ironblade. We left off the beginning of, what was it, chapter 9? Let me open our book here. How are we doing tonight? Sorry I have not been live the last few nights like I was supposed to be. I had just been kind of feeling blah and a little tired. Still like healing from surgery, so still on some restrictions until January. So I've just been trying to take it easy while still maintaining my home, which is not an easy thing to balance. All right, let me pull up our book here. Yes, we left off at chapter 9. And so when we left what was it, last week? Pa had been hinting around to going on a little trip and just happening to leave a key that would help Aaron get into the castle to possibly get Wafer back. So he had just entered the courtyard when we left. You there! Halt! A voice shouted from above Aaron. He cursed under his breath and slowly looked up. 3 steps and he'd already been caught. A soldier on watch duty atop the fortress walls pointed down at him. What do you think you're doing? Aaron gulped back his fear, but couldn't muster the courage to respond. If the wrong word spilled from his mouth. Close the door. You'll let bugs in. Relief swept over Aaron and he pivoted, headed back and pulled the door shut. Bugs? It was a courtyard. It didn't have a ceiling. Bugs would get in anyway. Maybe it's just an expression the wall watchmen use. He looked up, but the soldier had already gone back to watching the horizon. So far, so good. He kept his head and eyes down and tried to look like a soldier. He'd been one for so long, it should have been more natural, but nothing felt right. Was he walking too fast? Too slow? Would someone notice the back of his armor and say something? Was he carrying his shield right? Stop overthinking it and just move. Most of the soldiers milled about, talking and chatting. Some sparred with each other. Wooden practice swords and spears clacked and banged against iron shields. Other soldiers grappled, both upright and on the ground. A handful climbed ropes and ladders, racing each other to the top and back down again. Aaron scanned for anyone who might recognize him, especially Commander Brove, or any of his former Wyvern Knight comrades, but so far he hadn't seen any. He hoped they wouldn't all be at the roost either, but with Govelia at peace with her neighbors, the Wyvern Knights had nowhere else to be. It didn't bode well for Aaron's chances of going unnoticed. The courtyard ended with a set of doors leading into the fortress. Brown-gray stones formed the corridor walls, and iron-wrought torches mounted at regular intervals cast flickering light along his path. He wondered if perhaps his father had forged the torches in their mounting brackets. A fresh pang in his back severed his flippant thoughts. The sooner he got to the roost, the sooner he could free Wafer and get to the rest of his shroom stash. He reached a familiar spiral staircase, made from the same brown-gray stones, gripped the wrought iron railing mounted to the wall, and proceeded upward. Despite his attempts to take softer steps, the weight of the armor clanked when he moved, jerking and pinching his back. "Just a few more steps," he whispered. "Just a few more." The last time he'd taken these stairs was the day he'd been escorted out of the fortress. One of the benefits of being a wyvern knight included not having to worry about those stairs. He could just fly Wafer directly in and out of the roost, and the mess hall was just down the corridor from the roost. 5 minutes later, he crested the final stair and took a right turn into the corridor, which opened into the roost itself. From outside, a commoner might see the fortress's massive size and wonder what could possibly take up so much space. Even considering the fortress housed and fed the bulk of Galvalia's soldiers, the fortress was huge. But in fact, the roost claimed the largest chunk of space within the fortress, including the throne room. Rightfully so. Wyverns required a lot of maintenance. As Aaron ventured into the roost, he sucked in a sharp breath to fend off his burgeoning anxiety. It didn't help much. Under the open ceiling, the roost looked and smelled the same as it had when he left several weeks earlier. Wyvern stalls, each wide enough to accommodate a wyvern's 20-foot wingspan and corresponding length, lined the walls around a large central platform known as the launch pad. Antechambers for the knight's bunks and personal effects lay to Aaron's right, along with an antechamber for latrines, and a bath. Long before his promotion to the Wyvern Knight ranks as a featherwing, a new recruit, he'd hauled buckets of water up the very staircase he'd just summited to replenish the latrines and the bath. He didn't want to imagine what that kind of strain would do to his back now. Beyond the launch pad and the stalls lay the hatchery. Female wyverns laid eggs only once a year, almost always one single egg per wyvern, and only at certain ages. Certain male wyverns were permitted to fertilize the eggs soon after, and then the attendants brought the eggs into the hatchery. Aaron had watched, side by side with a dozen other rider prospects, as Wafer's tooth pricked through the eggshells. He'd watched as a shimmering blue-green creature covered in scales clawed its way into the world and scanned the hatchery for its lifelong partner, its rider. And then Wafer's golden eyes made contact with Aaron's. The bond forged in an electric instant. A tingle started on the tip of Aaron's nose and shot down his neck into his chest and arms and legs and fingers and toes. Wafer had leaped at him, tackled him to the floor, and wrapped his newborn wings around Aaron's torso. Aaron loved thinking of that moment now, but it had repulsed him at the time. Bloody, slimy afterbirth had still covered Wafer from his time inside the egg, and when he'd plowed into Aaron, the stuff got all over Aaron's chest, face, and arms. But that's also how Wafer had gotten his name. A piece of the egg had stuck to the top of Wafer's head, like a little hat. It was no bigger than a wafer. Aaron snapped out of it. He could reminisce later. Time was of the essence. He walked toward the launch pad and veered to the left. A trio of soldiers had led one of the wyverns out of its stall, saddled it up, and positioned it on the launch pad. It crouched low and exhaled a serpentine breath, and its rider mounted it. Aaron recognized the mount immediately. The roost only housed one orange wyvern with purple striping, Nilla, and its rider's unmistakable white blonde hair gave her away just as clearly. Phelan Uridi one of only 3 female wyvern knights commissioned by the army. She was the friend he'd saved, and in doing so, he'd injured his back. Phelan was stunning, both in appearance and prowess, and Aaron had always harbored an attraction for her. So he was glad when Nilla reared back, spread her wings, and launched into the blue expanse above the roost. It meant she wouldn't be a part of what happened next, whether good or bad. Once the other 2 soldiers cleared out, Aaron made for Wafer's stall. As he approached, his connection to Wafer strengthened, and Wafer's head popped up over the wall, searching with those unforgettable golden eyes. Aaron wished Wafer hadn't been so obvious about it, but maybe it wouldn't matter in a few minutes. He made it to Wafer's stall, unhindered. Wafer made a few reptilian chirping noises, and Aaron shushed him gently. Aaron checked over his shoulders to make sure no one had taken notice. It seemed as though they were still safe. "I'm happy to see you too," he whispered. "I'm here to get you out." Wafer's head bobbed, and he chomped his mouth open and closed lightly. "We'll get you something to eat later." Wafer huffed, loud and short. Aaron winced. It shouldn't have mattered. The wyverns made all kinds of noises on a regular basis, but it sent his anxiety spinning all the same. "Easy, boy. One thing at a time. I have to get you out of here first." Aaron checked the shackle on Wafer's right ankle, the same as always, connected to a thick black chain so Wafer couldn't just fly away, but made to unclasp easily and without a key in case of an emergency or an attack. "Straighten up. I'm going to unshackle you." Aaron reached down. Then a gruff, Eurythian accented voice behind him said, "Welcome back, Aaron." What are we drinking tonight, guys? I'm drinking some tea, a tea blend that my husband made. It's good for stress and anxiety. Nice and relaxing. What's your warm drink of the night? Chapter 10. Commander Brove had Aaron subdued and then shackled. Aaron had tried to fight back, but too many knights came at him, and the first tweak of his back sent spasms of sharp pain. Sent spasms of sharp pain ricocheting throughout his body. He gave up far quicker than he would have preferred. They set up a feeding post near the edge of the launch pad. Normally, they'd hang animal carcasses from it so the wyverns could feed without assistance. But this time, the knights hooked the chain of his shackles to the long hook embedded near the top. It stretched his arms high and ensured that his back pain persisted nonstop. Then Commander Brove summoned the entire unit to the edge of the launch pad. "A wayward son has returned," Brove announced to them. "Leatherwing Ironglade has come back to us, despite our best efforts to keep him out." The knights and the hatchery attendants surrounding them chuckled. "As you all know, he was discharged for treason, but General Cadamus saw fit to spare his life." Brove shook his head. "But now he has committed treason once again by violating the terms of his discharge, and through his attempt to steal a weapon of war. And the punishment for such treason is, unquestionably, death." No one said anything. Brove drew a dagger from his belt. A few of the wyverns stirred in their stalls. Aaron flinched, partly from the sight of the dagger, but mostly because of his back. The fingers on his right hand had gone partially numb, and the effect had also started in his forearm too, only it hurt more than it tingled. "But," he continued, It would be imprudent to kill him without a proper interrogation first. We ought to have some fun with this, don't you think? The crowd's reaction was mixed. They'd all been Aaron's comrades only a few weeks prior, and some of them had stood by Aaron when Brove had first accused him. Others, though, saw fit to side with Brove immediately. That divide separated those in enthusiastic agreement, now from those who saw the injustice of it all. Unanimous enough for me. Brove pressed the flat of the dagger against Aaron's cheek. An honest answer keeps you from getting cut. Any questions? Aaron very carefully replied, No. Good. How did you get in here? Aaron didn't want to betray his father's trust, so he'd come up with an alternative story just in case something like this happened. I stole a key on my way out of here, and I used it to walk right in the front doors. Bro's eyes narrowed, and he turned the dagger so its edge pressed against Aaron's right cheek. It's the truth, Aaron uttered from the opposite side of his mouth. The key's tucked under my breastplate. The dagger's edge pressed harder against Aaron's cheek. Then it relented. Brove lowered it and then motioned with it towards two of his men. You two, remove his breastplate. They complied, but not gently. Their tugs and pulls on the breastplate straps delivered new agony to Aaron's back, and he winced and gritted his teeth. Sure enough, the key his father had made fell out and thudded on the launch pad. As the two Wyvern knights tossed Aaron's breastplate aside, Brove picked up the key and examined it. Aaron fought to still his thundering heartbeat. It should be innocuous enough. After all, Pa had supposedly made dozens of such keys over the years. But the fear of being caught in the lie racked Aaron's nerves. For all he knew, Brove might have somehow been able to identify it as a new key. Brove turned towards the same two men and tossed them the key. Hold this. We're not finished yet. One of them caught it and held it down by his side. Brove placed the flat of his dagger on Aaron's left cheek next, harder than he had before. The slightest twitch and it would cut him. Second question, and this should be an easy one. Why did you come back? Aaron's jaw tightened. Brove was fishing for a full confession. But what other choice did Aaron have? I came back to free my wyvern. Brove twitched. Fire raced down the side of Aaron's face and warmth oozed out over it. Brove had cut him. Wafer roared from behind Brove and pulled against his chain, but he'd never break free from it. I told the truth, Aaron snapped. No, you didn't. Brove lowered the dagger and sneered at him. That wyvern is not yours. He never was, and he never will be. He's strictly the property of the Galvalian army. Aaron rolled his eyes. You knew what I meant. And you knew the rules. Brove pressed the dagger's edge against the thin, tight skin on Aaron's forehead. Next question. Aaron groaned and moaned, but he did so without moving his head. No sense in getting cut again if he didn't have to. I haven't even done anything yet, Brove said. It's my back. It's still wrecked from the accident. And you came unprepared? What happened to all your magic mushrooms? Brove taunted. He retracted the dagger. Aaron tried to shift, but the pain didn't subside. They're wearing off. I need another one. Brove tilted his head and smiled. He pressed the dagger against Aaron's forehead again, and Aaron stilled. Did you bring any with you? Aaron swallowed. Yes, in the pouch on my belt. Brove cut the pouch from Aaron's belt and tucked his dagger under his armpit. He unfastened the pouch, pulled out the cloth, and unwrapped it, revealing the blue mushroom. By that point, Aaron's right arm had gone almost completely numb, and he tried to adjust his position to give his right arm some relief. It didn't do much. The shackles just didn't allow him much range of motion. With one hand, Brove held the blue mushroom between his bare fingers and thumb and studied it. He still held the dagger in his other hand. "If I let you have this, will it help your back feel better?" he asked. He'd neglected to put the dagger against Aaron's body, but Aaron didn't mind. Aaron nodded. "Tremendously." Brove smiled his wicked smile again. Then he held the mushroom out toward Aaron. Aaron leaned forward and opened his mouth. This was all about to end one way or another. Then Brove dropped the mushroom to the launch pad and stomped on it. Dust-like particles puffed out from it in plumes, and they wafted towards the edge of the launch pad, toward the rest of the soldiers in the roost who had gathered around. Brove twisted his heel, grinding the mushroom into crumbles, and more spores shot out. He looked up at Aaron. "How does your back feel now?" Aaron stifled a smirk and turned it into a scowl. His backup plan had worked even better than he'd expected. "Have I ever mentioned how much I hate you?" "You have. I suppose I can't cut you for that, though." Brove laughed. "I know it's the truth." Aaron remained silent. "Last question." Brove extended his free hand, and a soldier stepped onto the launch pad and put the blunt end of a spear into his palm. Brove shifted his grip on it and sheathed his dagger. "How would you feel if I killed the army's wyvern right in front of you?" Aaron stayed silent again. It had to work. He'd touched the mushroom with his bare skin. It just had to work. Brove stalked across the launch pad toward Wafer, the spear clenched tightly in his hands. A rush of concern flooded Aaron's body, but not of his own conjuring. The emotion originated from Wafer and transferred to Aaron through their bond. Aaron tried to convey hope back to Wafer, as well as the courage to defend himself against Brove, but his anxiety got the better of him and he lost focus. "Come on!" Aaron's body tensed. "I need this to work." Then Brove stopped halfway to Wafer's stall. He shook his head, rubbed his eyes in his free hand with his free hand, and then continued forward. 3 steps later he stumbled, but he caught himself on the launch pad with the spear like it was a walking stick. His legs wobbled, and he swayed noticeably. "Gods, it's working!" Aaron smiled. He looked at the rest of the soldiers. Several of them traded yawns around the group, and he caught a few leaning on their comrades or on the edge of the launch pad with their eyes closed. One guy had even sat down against the launch pad, and all Aaron could see was the back and the top of his head. Brove glanced back at him, blinked 4 or 5 times, and then tried to stagger toward Wafer again, but he slumped down and lay near the far end of the launch pad near Wafer's stall. His spear clattered over the edge into a stop on the roost floor. Aaron beamed, and Wafer looked at Brove with ripe curiosity. The rest of the soldiers started dropping as well. Some of them had gotten wise to what had happened and started coming Aaron's way, but slowly, like slugs crossing a vacant street. It was time. Aaron maneuvered his arms and reached into the wrist of his left gauntlet. He could barely feel anything with his fingers being so numb, but he pushed through the sensation. It was a hard action to pull off, what with contorting his back and having to work around the shackles. But he managed to fish the shackle key out all the same, and he passed it to his left hand. Now he just had to hope that his father had made that set of shackles. He worked the key into the lock and wiggled it around until it bit. Then he twisted it hard. The shackle opened and his wrist slipped out. Aaron freed his other wrist next, much easier than the first one, and he left the shackles hanging on the post. He rolled his shoulders and tried to stretch out his back, and slowly the feeling returned to his right arm. Then he started walking toward Grove. One of the soldiers, a man he recognized as Porgus Darlton, reached for his leg, but in slow motion. Aaron hopped over it with ease. Porgus looked up at him with eyes full of grogginess and confusion. Then he sprawled out on the launch pad, eyes closed, and started snoring. Aaron reached Brove and looked down at him. Brove wasn't asleep yet, but he wouldn't last much longer either. What? How did you? Brove's words slurred out of his mouth. You probably won't remember what I'm about to tell you, Aaron began, but that blue mushroom was grown and imbued to put even the realm's most dedicated insomniacs to sleep. When you stomped on it, you sent thousands of tiny spores shooting out at the other soldiers, and now they're falling asleep too. But why why not you? Brove managed. Before I let myself in the front door, I took a mushroom that was grown and imbued to keep even the most hopeless narcoleptics awake. Aaron smiled. It totally negated the effects of the blue mushroom. Brove blinked long and hard, and drool oozed from the corner of his mouth onto the platform. Aaron had to hand it to him. He was really fighting to stay awake, and he'd outlasted most of his soldiers despite directly touching the blue shroom. You gonna you gonna kill me? Brove asked. Aaron shook his head. Nah. Why? Because I'm not a heartless piece of trash like you. Brove couldn't keep his eyes open anymore, and he fully succumbed to the shroom's effects. Aaron went back and grabbed his breastplate, found his helmet and shield, and recovered the key to the bronze doors next. Then he picked up Brove's spear. It was on the heavy side, but it was a wicked weapon with a three-pointed steel spearhead. It would do some serious damage in battle. Aaron wondered if his father had made it. Whether he had or not, Aaron was taking it. Then he turned to Wafer, who perked up immediately. Either Wafer was far enough away that the shroom spores didn't reach him, or they just plain didn't work on wyverns. I think I deserve a souvenir, don't you? Wafer snorted. It was a yes. Besides, he couldn't find the lance he'd brought in with him. This was more than a fair trade for his trouble thus far. Aaron opened the shackle on Wafer's ankle, and Wafer nuzzled his scaly snout against Aaron's chest and face. Aaron thought back to Cracker, who'd nuzzled Everly in much the same way after Aaron had freed him from the tree in Draenoff. Now he'd had his glorious reunion too. All right, boy. I know. I missed you too. Aaron coaxed Wafer out of his stall and onto the launch pad. Don't step on the commander. Wafer growled at Brove's sleeping form, but he stepped over him, as ordered. I hope you're ready to fly. We've got time for one stop at home, and then we're off to who knows where, and for who gods knows how long. Wafer's head bobbed up and down, and he made the same chomping noises as before. Yes, buddy. We'll get you fed, too. With his tail, Wafer flung the post aside as if it weighed nothing. It skidded off the edge of the launch pad toward the empty stall left by Nilla and Phelan. Then Wafer lowered himself so Aaron could saddle him up. Aaron hooked the breastplate and shield to the saddle. Then he mounted Wafer. It hurt his back to do so, but otherwise he'd never felt better. You ready for a new adventure? Aaron asked. Wafer didn't have to reply. Aaron could feel that he was. They both were. Aaron sent Wafer a command through their bond, and Wafer sprung off the launch pad and shot through the opening in the ceiling, carrying Aaron to the clouds high above. Yay! They rescued him. Well, they got out of the roost. That's that's they got out of the roost. They landed a few minutes later in front of Pa's shop. Nope, they made it to Pa's shop. Several people on the street eyed Wafer as he sat down, careful to back away to give him plenty of space. They stared, but didn't do anything else. Thanks to Commander Brove's repeated landings at that spot, the folks around the shop had grown accustomed to seeing wyverns around the area. Aaron hopped off of Wafer and ran inside. The sun had started to set and Pa wasn't there anymore, so Aaron deposited the borrowed armor and the key where he'd found them, more or less. He kept the shackle key, though, just in case he might need it again. Satisfied, he hurried back out, locked the shop door behind him, and then he and Wafer flew towards his parents' house. Wafer sat down in the street in front of the house, and Aaron beckoned him to roar with 3 taps on the nape of his neck. Wafer complied, and Aaron watched as the folks in his parents' neighborhood scattered. At least they weren't being nosy about it. The last thing Aaron needed was neighbors alerting the authorities to his whereabouts. His parents and sister scrambled out of the house and stopped when they saw Aaron and Wafer. Callie squealed. "He's beautiful!" She bounced up and down on her toes and inched closer. "Can I ride him?" Mom grabbed her by both arms and hauled her back. "It's bad enough that one of my children flies around, cheating death on a regular basis. You'll stay here with your feet stuck firmly to the ground." Aaron laughed. "Come on, Mom. It's perfectly safe, even for 2. Wafer knows what he's doing." Mom held her ground. "Some other time, perhaps. I can't abide it today." Aaron looked at Callie. "It's up to you." She sighed and nodded. "Yeah, some other time." As Aaron dismounted, Pa shook his head. "What?" Aaron asked. "I can't believe you actually pulled this off." "Yeah, maybe I'm not worthless and stupid after all." Aaron meant it as a joke. "Mostly." "You're not worthless or stupid," Pa said. Aaron grinned at him. Pa continued. "You just pursue worthless ideas and make a lot of stupid decisions." Aaron's grin dissipated and his voice flattened. "Thanks." "May I?" Mom raised her hands toward Wafer tentatively. "Touch him?" "Of course," Aaron smiled. "He only bites when I tell him to." Mom shot Aaron a glare, then she reached forward and stroked the side of Wafer's scaly neck. Kaylee joined her. Wafer leaned into the affection and made the same contented chirps that he'd made when Aaron showed up at his stall in the roost. "Pa, you can pet him too if you like," Aaron said. Pa held his ground. "No, thank you." "Suit yourself." Aaron turned to Mom and Callie. "Watch him for a moment while I go fetch some things from my room." They nodded, and Aaron headed inside the house. In his room, he collected his sack of shrooms and stuffed the remainder of his clothes and personal effects into a pack. He slung it all over his shoulder and headed back outside. "You're leaving?" Mom's eyes bore the same sadness as they had the day he'd arrived. "I'm sorry, Mom, but it'll be better for all of us if I go. I'm a fugitive from the Galvanian army now, so I can't stay." He took her hands in his. But I'll write often, and I'll stop by whenever I'm in the area. And if Pa ever lets you leave the city, maybe you could come and visit me sometime with Callie." "Where will you go?" Pa asked. Aaron knew the type of answer Pa wanted, and he knew Pa had asked more for Mom's benefit than anyone else. "I'll go wherever Wafer and I can find work, but I have to leave Galvalia, at least for now." Pa nodded, his face sullen. Mom's eyes teared up. "It was lovely having you back at home, even if it only was for a few weeks." Aaron wrapped her in a long hug and kissed her cheek. "I love you, Mom." Callie hugged him next, before he could say anything. She let him go after a moment and said, "Don't get yourself caught or killed out there, yeah? If I do have a wedding someday, I want you to be there, intact, and I want Wafer there too." Wafer snorted and bobbed his head. Then he chomped his jaws open and shut. Aaron chuckled. "He said that if there's food, he'll be there." Callie laughed and hugged Aaron again. Pa extended his hand and Aaron shook it. "I know we rarely see eye to eye, but I'm proud of you for the man you've become," Pa said. Aaron waited. Pa added, "Mostly, anyway." "There it is. Thanks, Pa. Take care of yourself, boy." Aaron smirked. "I will, old man." Pa's neutral expression soured, and he released Aaron's hand. "Call me old again, and I'll kick your ass." Aaron rolled his eyes. "I'd better go. No telling how or when they'll figure out what's happened." He mounted Wafer again, waved goodbye one last time, and then they vaulted into the air. As they flew, Aaron called out, "Wafer, how would you feel about becoming a mercenary?" Wafer bobbed his head and chomped with his mouth. As long as I get to eat." All right, so that was actually the end of the first novella. So that is the end of Aaron Ironclade's little beginning story. So the next time we hop in here, we will actually be starting with Etheridge, which is the story of Kent Etheridge's beginnings here. So we're going to go ahead and end stream here for the night, and we'll pop in and raid somebody. And then next week, we will continue learning about these mercenaries. Okay? Okay. Thank you guys so much for joining me tonight. It's been a pretty chill night, just drinking my tea and reading. It's been quite relaxing for me. I will be live tomorrow night. We are going to use our theater popcorn maker for the first time. We've got a little theater popcorn maker that we're going to try. Make sure it works and everything. And then if I can find a way to, I'm either going to find a way to stream a movie, or we may, if I can figure out how to do it, I want to go through this disc of pictures that I found from my trip to San Antonio when I was a teenager in high school and in band. We went to Texas and took a 6-day trip to San Antonio, did a whole bunch of shit, and I have a disc of pictures from there. And so I think that would be kind of fun to go through and look at, because I have not looked at those pictures in years. So that's the plan for tomorrow night, either a movie or trying to figure out how to get those pictures. So once again, thank you guys for joining me tonight. Let's see who's live right now. Well, yes, Twitch. I know I'm live. Thank you. Alright. Let's go ahead and pop in on Zoot. Looks like she's playing some Lego Fortnite right now. Oh yeah, she's playing some Lego Fortnite with Undisputed tonight. So let's go pop in there. Here is raid the raid prompts here. First one's if you are not a sub. Second one is if you are subbed. Alright. Alrighty, let's pop over to Zoot.